again, baseball romantics. Jason here with you from the Romantic About Baseball page, and we have another amazing guest for you. Another great bonus episode today with author Zak Ford. He authored a fantastic baseball book called Called Up. It's stories of big leaguers and just what it sounds like the day they got called up and the stories behind that. And to kind of, before we let him introduce himself, I just want to read this little short blurb from ZakFord.com that I think our listeners and our page followers will appreciate. Zak Ford doesn't follow the current baseball writing trends focused on statistical analysis and academic style research. He prefers stories that humanize players as opposed to dehumanize them. I love that blurb. Now, I myself am a stat guy and I love stats, but more than that, I love the human side of baseball and the stories that we don't usually see when we're just watching the game. So really like that. I think a lot of our listeners will identify with that. We got a lot of guys my age that don't like the analytics so much. So Zak, that being said, man, introduce yourself and the floor is yours, sir.
Well, I definitely appreciate you having me. So, as you'd referenced, pieced together, Called Up was released late of 2023, and it's a collection of first-person player stories about these players achieving the dream all of us had when we were kids. In fact, I'm 46 years old, and I still have that dream. Obviously, I have given up on it long ago, but I saw these. I mean, we all see these viral videos, each year pop up of, somebody calling their mom or somebody calling an old coach or something like that after a decade in the minor leagues. And it goes viral and it, kind of tugs at the heartstrings, right? And I was kind of, looking for something to do that would be, a collection of small stories. And I've always been interested in the human interest side of baseball. So did a little bit of research, realized that nobody else surprisingly had done a book about this. So I figured, hey, why not be the one that tackles it? So there's 109 stories in that book, all the way from 1961 debut of, Sudden Sam McDowell to 2018 with Patrick Wisdom, who's now in the KBO, still active.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think you kind of answered some folks' questions probably about, what inspired you to do this. And that's, I always marvel when somebody comes up with an idea like that, because you're like, why didn't I think of that? That's a fantastic idea. Because you're right. We do watch those videos. It's fun to watch and see these guys live out their dreams. And like you said, I'm 47 and that dream's still here, but I know it's not ever going to happen. So, that being said, I'm going to kind of kick it over to our guy Bruce here. And Bruce, take it away, man.
Yeah, Zach, so you touched on this a little bit here in your intro about looking at this idea of those moments when people were called up, and it really humanizes the experience for the, I guess, for the readers and for the fans. But what was the thing? Was there a moment that you said, I want to write about this human element in the game. I want to write about this moment, as opposed to saying, Patrick Wisdom's statistics were this in AAA, and therefore he got called up because he was the guy, at that moment. What inspired you to want to bring these stories out specifically?
Well, I'd always been interested in kind of like the behind the scenes parts of baseball stories. And I'm not a stats guy. It's just not something that I really pick up on or necessarily enjoy. It's just the thing that's great about baseball is, I believe, the human interest side of baseball. There's a different element, I think, in baseball. Obviously, I'm biased with it being my favorite sport, but to backtrack a little bit, I had a great uncle who played professional baseball from the 30s through 50s. And he was what you would consider, or what the term is, phantom major leaguer. That means that he was on a major league roster, but did not get into a game. It was 1946, made the Red Sox out of camp. Red Sox got off to one of their rare hot starts at that particular time. The services of a near 32-year-old rookie who had spent a good chunk of the last few years in Europe in World War II were not needed. He got released without getting into a game after a few weeks, got picked up the next day by the Boston Braves, crosstown team. Same thing happened. About a week, 2 weeks later, did not get into a game, got released, never made it back to the major leagues. And I knew that there was a sense of disappointment for my uncle of not getting into a major league game and becoming an official major leaguer per se, but I never really talked to him about it. And I knew it was something that was, not really a sore thing for him, but just there was a sense of disappointment there for him, and they're looking at that human side. I went to a lot of old reunions with him. I got to meet a lot of his old teammates and opponents. So I got to know baseball players as more than just baseball players. I got to know them as people. So I do think that there's a trend with statistical analysis, academic style research, which just really kind of dehumanizes players. And I wanted to kind of tell stories that were going to relate to the average fan of actually whether or not you're even a baseball fan. It's a book really about having dreams and setting off to achieve them. So I think that regardless of the level of baseball fan that we are, or whether or not even stats guys or academic style research guys, I think could appreciate that as well. So that's what I wanted to go after, and I'm pretty confident I was able to do that throughout these 109 stories.
Yeah, that's great, Zach. I mean, that, and I think a lot of fans identify with that approach, even the ones who are self-professed stats nerds and analytics people. So you mentioned about being able to go and meet these guys and see them as people and kind of get into this idea that hey, baseball players are people too. How did you go about identifying and selecting and talking to the folks that you might want to have included in the book? And then what were some of the challenges getting them to participate in the book?
My my criteria was pretty wide. If you were ever on a major league roster, I was willing to chat with you and include you in the book. So I had a pretty large net. So a few years ago, I started it. What would have been fall of 2019. And what I would do, and believe it or not, I would say about half to 2/3 of these guys actually came off of social media. I did have some friends within my baseball connections that provided contacts, and it just kind of grew organically from there. But honestly, about half to 2/3 of them just came from social media. I'd search Twitter at the time, now X, or Facebook for like MLB alum or former major leaguer, something like that. And then once you follow a few or become friends with a few, the social media algorithms start acting up. And I'd message these guys and just say, hey, look, do you have, 10 or 15 minutes for a short interview? My schedule's pretty flexible. It wasn't a huge ask. Usually what I would be able to do, I'd be able to get, everything knocked out for these stories within 10 or 15 minutes. Sometimes they went on to 40 minutes, but for the most part, if I was really focused, I'd be able to get something done in about 15 minutes with these guys if they were short on time. So just started reaching out to players, interviewed them over the course of about, I want to say 2 to 3 years. Pieced their stories together and in that first person narrative. So I wanted to also capture these stories in a way in which it sounds like you're listening to spoken word, if that makes sense, right? So it's like the player telling you their story. So, there are going to be some, there's going to be some incorrect grammar in there. Him and me and him, going instead of going. Those types of things I wanted to leave in there because when you're reading it, it just almost sounds like you're hearing it, if that makes sense. I've always been intrigued by Lawrence Ritter's Glory of Their Times. Even though a lot of those players were born about a century before me, just the way in which he presented those narratives help me relate to them as human beings. So that's what I wanted to do with these stories. I think the players appreciated that too, because it humanized them in a way, and was able to share. They were able to share, what was, the highlight of at least their baseball lives, with me, and have it presented before. I started off actually doing kind of teasers. I still do it occasionally on social media. So it just kind of helps spark up the interest. And then a few, players would, see these social media posts, and then, oh, I want to be involved in the project as well. So it just kind of grew organically over the course of a few years. The goal was from day one to eventually put together a book. But I just had a great reception from the players. And I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, and I'll just say real quick, as an example for our listeners, one of the guys I picked out that I really enjoyed was Tarek Bach, and you really capture his enthusiasm, that childlike, excitement. That because again, we think of these guys as they're professionals and they're serious, and this is their job. But he was giddy. Basically, he was. It was just like I feel like I would have reacted, like, oh my gosh, I'm in the big leagues. Like, and I thought that was pretty awesome. And if I remember correctly, he's the one that he actually opened his career in Tokyo. So he was in the Tokyo Dome,
He did. Yeah.
and so it's a really different atmosphere. But he really enjoyed it. Some guys might have been like, oh man, I wish I was back stateside for this, but he really enjoyed it. So it just really captured that exuberance that I think most of us that love the game feel like that's how we would act. You might try to keep it inside, but that's how you're feeling on the inside if you ever got that opportunity.
Mhm. And there were quite a few guys. I mean, there are some guys who had, borderline Hall of Fame career, like your Bobby Gritches, stuff like that. Guys who had, multiple Gold Gloves or All-Star games and were, fairly well known. But the vast majority of these guys, are guys that, may have spent a half dozen, 7, 8, 9 years in the minor leagues before finally getting that opportunity. So these stories of perseverance, I think, resonate, with, fans. And also there's a lot of ball players too that were kind of able to feed off of some of these stories as well. Sometimes you'll see them, share the posts on social media and, talk about how it also brought up memories for them. Um, Jerry Royce. Jerry Royce is the longest tenured player in the book with 22 major league seasons. And he actually sent me, one of the biggest compliments of any of the players. He sent me an email a few months after I sent him a complimentary copy and said, hey, with every story I read, I was able to relive that moment. So,
Yeah,
I'm glad the players enjoy it. I'm definitely glad that the readers are enjoying it as well. And I'm just hoping more and more readers will continue to purchase the book and enjoy the stories.
absolutely.
Yeah, so it's great. Jason and I were talking a little bit about Jerry Royce's book a little bit before you got on, and we have been messaging over social media this morning, and Jason mentioned one of my favorite stories, and you just brought him up, was the Bobby Gritch story, because I can picture Earl Weaver sitting in his office with a pack of Marlboros there and saying, "What do you want?" In that Earl Weaver-esque way that, we all can just visualize this. He doesn't have a hat on, his hair's mussed up, right? What, if any, what story might stand out to you out of the book that you either enjoyed with, identified with in some way the most out of all of them?
It's funny. I mean, I interviewed 149 players for the book. 109 are in the book. I had to go back out and get releases, and just in the process, some of them are basically cold calls. So I didn't get all 149 back, but 109 ended up being a perfect number for the word count that the publisher wanted me. But I would, over the course of these interviews, 149 interviews, I would hear a story and I'd think to myself, oh, this is great. This is one of the best I've heard. And then I'd interview somebody 2 weeks later and I'd go, oh, yeah, this is the best one I've heard. And it continued like that for like literally a few years. I mean, admittedly, I am a Giants fan, and I am 46 years old, right? So naturally, the mid to late 80s to early 90s are what I'm going to gravitate to the most, just because that was when I was at my highest peak of baseball nerdiness, right? Um, so, there are some of the guys that are in that era that I remember as a kid that I just love chatting with. But some of the guys that are a little bit more recent had some wonderful stories too, that are more along my age. One of the guys I remember, actually remember this story. As a Giants fan, when this guy came up in 2001, is Jaw Leach. He spent 12 full years in the minor leagues before finally getting his cup of coffee. So obviously, that's a huge emotional thing. He has his dad there at the game for that last game of the season. And, he calls his dad into the clubhouse, and the clubhouse boy comes running in and say, "Hey, Mr. Leach, you got to come in and see your son." And is rushing in thinking that there's something horribly wrong. And they have this moment in the clubhouse, after 12 years. I mean, I think he's 30 or 31 years old or something like that when he finally gets his opportunity. That is just phenomenal. He ends up going to San Francisco the next day, gets into a game a couple days later. Eventually, he gets one major league hit. So he's not a household name, but those are the stories that I actually tended to gravitate to more than anything else. Another one of the stories, a guy came up, I want to say it was 2013 with the Baltimore Orioles, Mike Belfiore. He got 3 call-ups. He got called up, I want to say, in May, June, and then finally he was a September call-up. First 2 call-ups, his family's at every single game. He doesn't get into a game. Doesn't actually get into a game. They're at every single game through his September call-up. He's sitting on the bench for like 2 weeks or something like that, right? Finally gets into one single major league game. That's all that his major league career is, one game. The first batter he faces is David Ortiz, and David Ortiz hits a home run off of him. And admittedly, he says that he was pretty upset at the time, but 12+ years later, it obviously makes a great story. And he understood that, as he's able to reflect on it in time, that, those 3 call-ups, one major league game, David Ortiz home run, does make for a huge, a huge story, a great story, with a lot of human interest elements in it. But those are just a couple. I mean,
telling that story. Yeah.
15
Sorry.
more. But those are a couple of the ones that I tended to like, the stories of guys that maybe had like 1 cup of coffee, because there was a little bit more of a sense of appreciation. I mean, there are guys that were number 1 picks that made their second spring training. Hey, I appreciate those stories as well, but I just don't gravitate to them quite as much as that guy who grinded it out for 6, 7, up to 12 years in Jaw Leach's case.
Yeah. If I played one game and I gave up a homer to David Ortiz, I would be telling that story in every bar, every sports bar, to everybody I could find. Hey guys, one time I gave up a home run to David Ortiz. Seriously, that's good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Jason, I have a story like that, right? I told you the Vladimir Guerrero story, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so
right.
I lead with that kind of story as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because what else do you have? And it's
Yeah,
exciting.
exactly.
Yeah. So Zach, we spoke, I think before we started recording, we spoke a little bit about how this book goes from 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. I mean, it really spanned generations of not just players, but fans as well. What kind of commonality did you find between those stories? And you just mentioned this idea of the guy who gets called up and maybe just has a cup of coffee versus someone who makes their second spring training. And how much did you experience a common storyline or difference between some of those?
Well, I mean, all of them are a very similar theme, right? Of the major league call up and debut. And for the sake of just the book, I included folks that made the team out of spring training amongst the featured stories in the book. But you referenced the different the how the stories are broken up, the different time frames. It's 60s and 70s, 80s, 90s, and since 2000. So obviously, as you're going through these different time frames, you're going to have different themes, right? In the 60s and 70s, you have a huge amount of expansion, expands the rosters. You have minor leagues that disband, amateur drafts, labor relations that have changed as well. 1980s, you also have, towards the beginning of the decade, you have a strike in 1981. You have a rise in relief pitching, which obviously impacts how teams are, balancing their rosters with more relief pitchers. There's, in the 90s also, you end up with, the baseball strike. We all can remember that. There are a lot of players that were impacted by the 1981 strike too. And it's interesting also about how these players get the news from, the 1960s stories to the more recent stories. Obviously there was no texting really even in the 90s, right? So now it's, some of these players could get a text and say, hey, report to the ballpark, or come up to my hotel room or something like that. Obviously that wasn't a possibility in the 60s. Or like Jerry Royce, I referenced his story earlier. He found out he was going to get called up through a registered letter. Obviously that would be completely unheard of right now, right? um you know Gene Tennis is in the book. He found out because it's kind of a funny story. He actually had gone out, and he had gone out past curfew after a game with some of his teammates. And he comes back past curfew, and the manager is just waiting for him out in front of the hotel. And they're all like, oh crap, this is not going to be good. So the manager says, hey, you guys, everybody but Gene, get up to your rooms. I'm going to talk to you a little bit later. So he manager brings Gene Tennis into his room and says, hey, drink this scotch. And he's like, okay, well, I'm not a scotch drinker. He's like, drink it. I'm like, okay. He gets on the phone. He's like, yeah, I was able to track him down. Yeah, he's here. Okay. Yeah, I'll get him on his way. But and Gene's like, what in the world is going on? Because he doesn't tell Gene what's going on because he's pissed, right? That he's been having to wait for hours until they come back from the bar with their buddies, right? And finally, the manager hangs up and says, hey, relax, drink that scotch because you're going to be catching Catfish Hunter in a couple days.
Nice.
And he's just like, okay, that was a weird way to find out. But those types of things, just the way in which the players got the news too, evolved throughout those time sections. In addition to what I had alluded to earlier in regards to how rosters were impacted based on other impacts that baseball was going through.
Yeah, Gene Tennis, that was one of my favorite stories. That was one of my favorites. And I'm trying to, well, first of all, we get a lot of younger folks probably Googling registered letter at this moment. But also, I'm trying to picture Earl Weaver and these days doing one of those videos like you talked about. He's going to be like, no, he's going to be yelling at people and throwing their phones around, right? We're not doing a video for you guys. So times have definitely changed for sure.
Absolutely.
So Zach, with this great collection of stories that you have here, what are some things you hope that readers are going to take away from this and bring with them forward?
Well, I do think that they're going to read them and they're going to enjoy them first and foremost. I think that regardless of whether or not you're a baseball fan or you're just reading this as a baseball fan looking for player stories, I do think that a lot of folks will be able to read these stories and be inspired themselves to continue to persevere and dream and work hard to achieve, whatever it is that they're all, setting out to do. Obviously, in this case, it was to reach the major leagues and play in the major leagues, but these stories will resonate for anybody who dreams of anything, really. And that's ultimately what I wanted to accomplish by putting these stories together. Obviously, I want, fans to be able to read these stories and realize that ball players are human beings. They're not just, robots. So many people, I guess, and I don't want to go off on my, stat. And I'm not necessarily anti-stat guy, but so many people just kind of look at it at a statistical level nowadays and just assume that it's almost like robotic. You're dealing with various human elements of these players as well. So that's something that I think is extremely important. In fact, I preface the very first line of the book, of the introduction is, as a young boy, I did not see Major League Baseball players as human. Because I didn't. I thought there were like godlike superheroes put on these, baseball field, my entertainment, right? But obviously, as I got older, I realized that, they are definitely human. That baseball stories, whether they're call-ups or things that are going on in the dugout, whatnot, there are so many other human interest sides of baseball, human elements in baseball stories beyond just the stats of these players.
That's
Yeah,
great.
I absolutely think the human side of that will resonate with everybody. You don't have to be a baseball fan to enjoy these stories. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree, Jason. I think the stories are accessible to people even with a casual interest in that idea of humanizing those that we put on a pedestal, whether we're 6 or 60, in a lot of ways. But I do also think that your description of what you want people to do in the book does segue nicely into the question of what's your next project? Where are you going next from the idea of being called up to what?
Next up is actually the working title of the book, and it's going to be about the post-playing careers of players, and there will be a little bit of a focus on the transition phase. A lot of people have this misconception that ball players can, just retire when they're 30 years old and sail off in the sunset. That is a little bit more common nowadays, I guess you could say, based on what they're making. But the vast majority of ball players, especially these guys that are featured within this book, they're guys, like I had said earlier, that, had grinded it out for sometimes almost a decade in the minor leagues. They may get, parts of, 3 or 4 years in the major leagues. Let's say they're getting, each year they're getting a couple of months of decent checks or something like that. But if you spread that out over the course of a 10-year professional career, that's definitely not enough to sustain you very much beyond when you hang up your cleats. So, what this book will be, the next step book will be about, how they kind of saw the writing on the wall, how they transitioned into something after playing. Some of these guys are, folks that entered completely different careers. Some of the folks are going to be folks that entered coaching careers or scouting careers, front office. Some of the guys, the vast majority of them are going to be guys that are in the called up book, but there will be some other guys as well. Some other guys that, were that never reached the major leagues that I was friends with that are going to be included in the book as well. So I'm kind of wrapping up the interview phase of that project right now, in the process of turning those transcripts into first person narratives. They will be longer stories, so I anticipate probably somewhere around 45 to 50 stories for this particular book. I have planned to turn it into the publisher in October. So I imagine sometime maybe the summer or fall of 2026, we'll have a finished product.
Awesome. Look forward to that. Really enjoyed this one, and that sounds amazing as well. I recently reached out to a former player to try to get him on our podcast. Haven't heard back yet, but he's selling real estate, so you just never know what that career brings afterwards. But Zach, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on, and we're gonna share the link to your book, and we're gonna promote it as much as possible because it really is a good read. And like we mentioned, you don't have to be a baseball fan, but for our audience, that's probably 99.9% big baseball fans. They're going to love it. I mean, I really had a fun time going through it. And Bruce, did you have anything else, man, you wanted to wrap up with?
I just wanted to kind of echo Jason's sentiments. The folks who do frequent our page and who do listen to the podcast are strangely enough a lot like Jason and I, where we are kind of wrapped up in this human history, romance of the game, and this speaks to that idea, the romance of getting called up and maybe only pitching. What he pitched 2 1/3 innings, I think, and gave up 2 home runs, but one of them was to David Ortiz, and that's his lead story. That's the stuff that makes people really fall in love with the game, as strange as it sounds. And that's here. That I think these are our people.
I think that most of us had that dream, regardless of how close we got. Me personally, I was terrible. I always loved baseball, but over the course of my little league days, I may have broke the Mendoza line. So but I still had these dreams as this 200 little league hitter, of reaching the major leagues. Obviously, I realistically knew that wasn't going to happen, but I think we could all relate to that dream. And there are still some times at 46 years old where I will dream, not realistically, but I'll have those dreams at night where I'm out in right field of Candlestick Park, and for some reason I do a Smalls from the Sandlot throw into home. Obviously that's just Candlestick doesn't even exist, but I still have that that dream in my mind, and I think a lot of us have those continued dreams, even though they are obviously not going to come to fruition, or they're just literally just far-fetched. But I think that a lot of players or a lot of readers will be able to resonate to these stories because these ball players present, their stories are getting called up and making their major league debut in such a human fashion.
We had very similar little league careers. I can say that. My goal was to get a walk.
I'm
just
very
walk me, please
thankful.
walk me.
The only was a total embarrassment when they put on a glove.
I could catch okay, but I was like, just walk me, please walk me.
Okay.
All right. Hey, Zach, again, man, we really appreciate this. We'd love to have you back when your new book comes out, and we're looking forward to that. And anything else you want to say to the audience before we wrap it up?
I just I appreciate the time. Appreciate your viewers, and definitely love to chat with folks. They can follow me on social media. Go to the website. I definitely love to engage with fellow baseball nerds, and talk about their dreams we have, and the projects that we have. Met a lot of great. I'm far from even out of the red on this particular book, but it's something that I always wanted to do, was write a baseball book, dating back to when I was a kid. Finally, accomplished that when I was 44, 45 years old. But I've met a lot of great people throughout the process of the release of Called Up, and definitely love the opportunity to meet even more.
Awesome. Well, thank you, man. You have a great night. And to all our listeners, we will see you at the ballpark.